What's going on, everybody? We're back for week 9 of the college football breakdown show. It's your boy YonkersCFB here to break down this slate. I'm going to break down the Friday night slate. I think there's a 3-game slate. We had 1 game canceled. And then I'm going to break down the main DraftKings slate. There's a 14-game slate. Might be 13 with the cancellation of the Wisconsin game. Quick recap of last week. It wasn't a very good week for me. Seems like most of my lineups had Jalen Waddle in there, who got injured on the opening kickoff, or Daz Newsome in there. So some misses on my end. The Waddle one, couldn't expect. I had some good calls with the Hawkins and Tutu Atwell, amongst others. I had them stacked, and it was looking pretty good, but just missed on the fringes. So we're close. So looking to have a good week here. As far as the Friday night slate goes, let me break down this one. We have a 3-game slate. The first one, Minnesota versus Maryland. Minnesota's the team you are going to want to target here. I think everybody's viable. I think Mo Ibrahim is probably the best running back on the slate. He's really expensive, so it might be a little difficult to get in there, but I still really like him. Tanner Morgan isn't a must because he is really reliant on his passing stats. He has no rushing stats, which I really don't like to see. In general, this Minnesota offense didn't really look fantastic. I know they had a lot of COVID concerns, especially on the offensive line. But I still think they're just going to overmatch this Maryland team that just straight up stinks. So Morgan's in play, Bateman's in play. Where I definitely am going to go for the value play is Ottman Bell here. This guy's an NFL wide receiver, in my opinion. He didn't really showcase much versus Michigan, but he did have a nice 40-yard catch. I think he's their clear wide receiver, too. He was out there running routes as their wide receiver, too, pretty much all game, if you were watching that, especially before garbage time. So I really like Ottman Bell's value there at 4,000, but I think everybody in Minnesota is in play, and I do not hate a Minnesota stack. I also will probably end up betting Minnesota minus 20 by game time. It was around minus 19.5. I'm not sure where it ended up. As far as Maryland, so Tua's brother, this Tonga Vailoa down here, I don't expect him to see the field again. He was really, really, really bad. I don't think he should be seeing the field in Power 5 conference. So I think this guy, Legender, not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I think he is the more talented quarterback, and I expect him to see snaps for the majority of this game, if not the entire game. So at 5,500, he's worth mentioning because he can scoot a little bit. We haven't seen how much, and they're going to be playing from behind. And this Minnesota defense looks like they might be, if not bad, then at least taking a significant step back, I will say. Overall, this Maryland team's not one you're going to want to target very much, maybe one player here or there. So if you're not going to play Legender, because there are some other good quarterbacks, I don't know how much of him I'm going to have. Isaiah Jacobs, so they have 3 running backs they give the ball to. I definitely think I'm going to slip one of these guys in if I need a salary saver. So first off, Jake Funk seems to be, he's the highest priced guy, but I'm not sure there's much separating these guys, so I probably would prefer Jake Funk to anybody. Then I would prefer Penny Boone. This guy was a star recruit. He's a freshman, and he was pretty decent last game with his carries. He was way more effective than Isaiah Jacobs, so I like Penny Boone at 3.3 versus this beatable Minnesota defense. And Isaiah Jacobs, Josh Jacobs' younger brother, once again, he was not very effective with his carries, so I'm not really looking to go to him. But, these guys all really evenly split carries, and they didn't get very many of them, and they're probably playing from behind, so I don't love them. But their price is just too cheap, so they're not terrible. I'm not going to target any Maryland wide receiver. I'm going to tell you that right now. All right. East Carolina versus Tulsa. East Carolina is a team I really like to go to. They're always underpriced. Tulsa, I think, is a team that's a little bit overrated. I like them. I bet on them last week. But people seem to think they're a little bit better than they are. I mean, you can't really trust this offensive power attack. So, it's not a high-powered attack. So I'm not super interested in Zach Smith there at the quarterback position. I do like their running backs. The problem is we don't know if Wilkerson's going to play. I had some shares of him last week, and he just mysteriously didn't travel with the team. So that was lovely, and I have no idea if he'll be back. If he is out, if I get word that he's out, I like their backups. I think Prince is fine. He's more of a big play threat, but I think Taylor is just as good, if not a better option. He doesn't have quite the big play threat, but he gets more red zone carries. So at 3.9, Taylor, I will be playing him, especially if Wilkerson is out. That's a good salary reliever. Their wide receivers, they spread the ball out. Keelan Stokes is pretty good. They go to him a lot, and he's their big play guy as well as their short yardage guy. He's by far their number one guy. Anyone below him is just kind of cheap. Santana had a nice touchdown last game. Johnson's not a good pricing for me. Crawford is, he's okay. He's fine. So overall, I'm not super targeting this Tulsa team, but they should win. They're favored by 18, and Eastern Carolina's defense is very poor. With their defense being poor and them playing from behind, I will have interest in them. Not quite as much interest as normal because this Tulsa defense is very good. Most notably, everybody saw them, what they did to Oklahoma State, shutting that offense down. Although Oklahoma State did have a quarterback injury, still very impressive. And then they held UCF. Even though UCF scored points, they still held them well below their average yardage totals, which is very impressive because nobody can slow UCF down. So not super interested in ECU, but Holton Ahlers can scramble a little bit. So at 6.3, he was out for, I believe it was contact tracing last week. So at 6.3, I think he's okay. Not interested in their running backs at all. But I think all their wide receivers are fine. Tyler Snead is more of a short guy. He could be a target hog, and when they're playing from behind, and one where this Tulsa defense might give him a lot of problems, I could see him going to Snead. And CJ Johnson continues to be mispriced. He has had a very poor start. Oh, yeah. DraftKings still doesn't have any of their game longs updated, which has been lovely dealing with. Anyway, CJ Johnson at 3.7, he's a very good talent at 3.7, and he's a big play guy, so he's another very good salary reliever. Moving on. Hawaii versus Wyoming. This one's a hard one to tell. It's a hard one to call because Wyoming usually is a very good defensive team, but they looked very poor defensively on pretty much every level last week, especially in the passing game. And they also had their quarterback, Sean Chambers, go out. So this Wyoming team is a very difficult one to call. It is in Laramie. Usually I back Wyoming in Laramie. Maybe I will in this game. But Hawaii's offense looked really good against Fresno State in game one. They really showed a commitment to the running game, which I actually thought they had an underrated running game going into this year. And the fact that they looked so good in week one, they ran for over 300 yards against Fresno. I think I'm going to back some Hawaii stacks this week since it's pretty much either Hawaii or Minnesota for the stacks. Chavon Cordero, their quarterback's very good. He's a dual threat as well. If you're looking to stack him, Busey and Smart are definitely your number one and number two guys. I don't really have a huge preference either way. Busey's a transfer, so it's hard to know, but they had a pretty even target share in week one. I think they're the clear number one, number two guy. And I will definitely be playing Miles Reed. I think this guy is a sleeper this year. 6.2 is an okay price. And he ran for over 100 yards in the first week, but he just didn't quite see the touchdown. So it's hard to tell whether this Hawaii team's really going to have such a successful running attack as it looked like they would, but with the new coaching staff and, like I said, them being underrated going in to the year, that is something I am willing to target. All right, as far as Wyoming, let's take a look at them here. Again, a hard team to read. I think mostly, if I had to guess, with the backup quarterback in there, and their backup quarterback makes some mistakes. He was pushing the ball downfield, but he looks like he likes to make some mistakes. I really like Xavier Valladay. He was the guy I really had circled going into the year. He did not have a very good year against Nevada in week one, which I do think is concerning. But again, I think if you're going against this Hawaii team, you're going to want to run the ball to have success. So I can see Valladay having, 30 carries in this one. So I am interested in him at 7.2, especially if I run that back with a full Hawaii stack. Don't hate that at all. So if I'm stacking a game, this one's going to be it. I'm not super interested in the quarterback there and not interested in the wide receivers. So pretty much just Valladay. Levi Williams can scramble a little bit, so I could see him being decent, but I think there are other better quarterback options. All right, that's it for Friday night slate. I tried to keep it quick here. I always tend to run long, so I'm trying to keep it quick. All right, as far as Georgia versus Kentucky goes, this Kentucky offense hasn't been able to do anything. They've had fewer than 300 yards in each of their last three games. They had 145 yards last time out against Missouri, and now they play arguably the best defense in college football. So you can imagine how this one's going to go and where I'm looking. As far as Kentucky's defense, they do force mistakes, and Stetson Bennett really likes to make mistakes. So I think this could be a really low-scoring, ugly game. I'm not going to have much ownership. And when I'm looking to target Georgia's rushing attack, it is worth noting they are only rushing for 3.96 yards per carry so far this year. That's only 8th in the SEC. That's way different than we would normally expect from a Kirby Smart Georgia team. In the past, they've averaged 4.94, 5.9, 5.79, and 4.66 yards per carry. So they're really not going to get that rushing attack going. And Kentucky is allowing only 3.49 yards per carry through 5 games so far this year. So it's just a belief in whether or not you think Georgia's going to look to get that running game going, or whether they just haven't been successful. So overall, I'm mostly avoiding this game. I will have some Zamir White shares, Georgia's running back, because he is supremely talented. And even though Kentucky's been fine, I'm not sure they faced a team as talented as Georgia. So I will have some Zamir White. But honestly, that is pretty much it. It's not a game I want to target. The only thing worth mentioning on the Kentucky side, so they haven't been able to get anything going, like I said here. But if you're really desperate for a super flex, so their quarterback Terry Wilson's going to be out, and their backup quarterback Joey Gatewood should be starting here at 4.7K. It's hard to find a starting quarterback that cheap. He is a dual threat. He's a transfer from Auburn. A lot of people seem to think he's better than Terry Wilson, and the way Terry Wilson's played so far this year, I don't hate it. If you're wondering, well, why wasn't he starting if he was better? That's a valid question, but also the transfer eligibility rules, they didn't rule him eligible until right as the season started. So again, going against this Georgia team, I'm not really sure what the upside is, but playing from behind, dual threat quarterback, 4.7K, I thought it was worth mentioning if you really, really, really need salary saving. All right, Iowa State versus Kansas. So let's talk about the Iowa State side here. This is one you're going to want to target. Kansas has been outscored 187 to 52 so far this year. That's an average of 33.7 points per game. This Kansas team sucks. They're 0-5, and they're 4 touchdown dogs in this one. And this Jayhawks defense has allowed 45 points and 437.6 yards per game. So let's target Iowa State in this one, shall we? Breece Hall at 9.1 obviously is a fine option, super expensive, but week in and week out he performs. Brock Purdy at 7.2 is a quarterback I'm definitely looking to target this week. He has not had a great start, but Kansas should cure all ills. If you are looking to stack him, Xavier Hutchinson has clearly developed as their number 1 wide receiver target, so at 5.5, I think he's very decent. And then Charlie Kolar remains too cheap as one of the top tight end options. I believe he had 12 targets last game as well, so he has seen an uptick in production and is somebody you might want to target. As far as the Kansas side of things, they are dreadful. Not really going to target them at all, except maybe Velton Gardner. I believe he had 16 carries, really took over the backfield after Puka Williams is announced to be out for the year, their star running back. So Velton Gardner is a decent option, but again, in a team that's 4 touchdown dogs playing from behind, I'm not sure how much of the running back you want, but that is a very good price, so I will have some Velton Gardner. Next game, Kansas State versus West Virginia. A game I'm really not interested in much at all. This should be low scoring. West Virginia is a 3.5-point favorite, which seems a little weird. That's probably only because they're at home, and then I don't even know how many fans they're going to have. But neither one of these teams is really looking to push the pace. I know West Virginia has been so far, but, I mean, their offense stinks. So Kansas State, their whole offense is Deuce Vaughn at 7.2. That's too expensive going against the West Virginia defense. Sure, he could break a few big ones, so he's fine, but that price is really bad. Will Howard, the Kansas State quarterback, I really don't trust him. I have not been impressed from what I've seen. I'm going to give him some leeway because he was pretty good in high school, and he was thrust in there as a starter when Skylar Thompson went down for the year, their assumed starting quarterback. I just haven't been impressive. He fell flat on his face when he had a chance to, wide open field, a chance to tie that TCU game. I know I mentioned it last week, but after seeing that, at 5.9, he's cheap, and he had a good game last week against poor competition. But that's about it for me. Bradley Moore, their tight end, at 4K is a decent option. All right, West Virginia. Again, not much ownership interest in this game. The only way I would look is Letty Brown. He is, again, kind of their entire offense. They feed him the rock over and over and over and over again. So in a game that's supposed to be pretty tight, and maybe they'll have the lead, Letty Brown is fine. 8.1K I think is too expensive, so I don't know how much I will have, but there is a chance he has a pretty good game. All right, Boston College versus Clemson. So the news here, obviously, was just announced right before I started recording this video. But Trevor Lawrence has the Rona. Mr. We Want to Play now cannot play for now. It'll be interesting to see whether or not he is back next week for Notre Dame. So I would think they really try to. I would think they're going to want to get their backup some reps here, some solid reps to get him ready for Notre Dame. So I could see them maybe throwing a little bit more than they anticipated, I suppose. So DJ Ukulele, DJU, one of the top quarterbacks in all of college football, the top prospects, I will say. Big kid, can run it, can really throw it downfield. I'm really excited to watch him play this week. So at 6.8K, you have to mention him here. ETN is always fine. Amari Rodgers continues to be their best target, their most reliable target on a team that has almost nobody seeing reliable targets because they blow everybody out. So Amari Rodgers in a DJU stack is pretty tasty. Other than that, their wide receivers are pretty much a crapshoot. I mean, Frank Lanson is their second guess guy, I would say, and then probably their tight end, Galloway. I'm not super interested in Powell at 3.8K, but of course he could catch a touchdown. But I think the interesting one is, where'd my guy go? Oh, no, I messed up my... wherever Nada is. For some reason I don't see him. Maybe I'm blind. Nada at 3.2. He's a big prospect, so maybe he'll have a big game. He's done like absolutely nothing so far this year, but he's probably gonna have a big breakout game eventually. So with a new quarterback, maybe. But again, that's just a punt play. All right, Boston College side of thing. I mean, they're gonna be playing from behind. They'll probably throw the ball a lot. Some people will probably point to the fact that Syracuse scored 21 points against this Clemson defense last week. So how dominant really is this Clemson defense? Well, I mean, one of those scores was a pick six, so I don't know how much stock you can really put into that. But either way, they're going to be throwing from behind. So Jerkovic at 5.8K, again, I don't love that, but he'll throw a lot, and he's big. Maybe he stumbles into a touchdown. Other than that, Hunter Long and Zay Flowers are the target hogs on this team. As I mentioned every week, Zay Flowers is the one that has the real touchdown upside and the big play upside. So he is okay, but you're not going to want to go crazy here, and they absolutely cannot run the ball to save their lives. So no thank you on their rush game. All right, Michigan State versus Michigan. This Michigan State team stinks. They lost to Rutgers last week. That's pretty much all I have to say about them. Their running backs, they give three of these guys carries. Simmons was the main guy last week. Collins was expected to be the main guy going into it. And Hayward is solid. What's his name? Connor Hayward, yeah. So, yeah, no interest. I mean, they're big underdogs in this one. The only way I would look at this one, because this Michigan defense looks like they might be pretty nasty, man. They really put on a show against Minnesota in that night game last week. They have two good receivers, Jaden Reed and Jalen Naylor. These guys are really good. I'm not sure which one's better than the other. I haven't seen enough of them yet. Reed transferred over from the MAC. I believe he was from Western Michigan, where he was a stud, and he really went off in game one. Both of these guys are top targets. I mean, Naylor's cheaper, so that's probably the way I'll have more ownership, but I think Reed is also fine. Remember, they're going to be playing from behind. Their quarterback play stinks, so it's a little risky. It's kind of a, plug your nose and jump kind of a play, but you could do worse in a game they're supposed to be trailing, and those are bona fide talents, It's different if you just take a stab at a nobody because they're playing from behind, but if you take a stab at an NFL talent for playing from behind, there's much more of a likelihood that they break a big one. All right, Michigan, Joe Milton looks good, but I'm not really sure I'm going to pay up for Joe Milton. I'm not really at that level yet. Maybe I'm just slow to the chase, but he's got decent rushing ability. He's a big kid, big arm. I don't like any of his stacking options because they really spread the ball around. I think Ronnie Bell is their best target and their most reliable target. I think he will be going forward, and he's fast enough to break a big one. So I like Ronnie Bell at 5.3. I'm really disappointed Nico Collins isn't playing this year because I was going to have a lot of Nico Collins, but that's a tangent. Yeah, other than that, they gave, I forget what the final tally is, but they gave like a million different receivers catches last week. So if you want to take a stab at a guy below that, go for it, but that is not my style. This Michigan State team stinks, so Michigan will probably score, but I mean, if Michigan State has a strength, it's probably their ability to slow the game down and have a capable defense. Michigan's rushing attack is interesting, but also at the same time not very interesting. I do think Haskins is the better guy. He was actually cheaper last week, so I played him over Charbonnet. Charbonnet had 70 yards on 4 carries, but he had a 70-yard touchdown on one of those carries. Didn't do much outside of that, but at the end of last year, Haskins was definitely trending, getting more carries than Charbonnet. So while it is a running back by committee, Haskins gets more carries, but I don't love either of those guys. I mean, there's no guarantee they get a ton of carries in this offense. Like, they could all finish with below 10 carries again like they did last week. So not super interested in that game. There's not a lot of easy games to target this week. It's a little tougher. You kind of have to pick and choose your spots. I mean, there's already a lot of games this week I've mentioned I'm not super interested in. So I'll probably have less like stacks and less game stacks than I normally do. Once again, if you haven't watched any of these videos before, I don't play 150 lineups. I'm just not that kind of guy. And my financial situation is not playing a million lineups. So I give you information that hopefully will help you if you do play 150. If you don't, hopefully this does still help you. I'm just trying to give you information, man. This is a free video. I'm always hungry for college football content and especially DFS content. There's not a whole ton of it on YouTube. So if you like what I'm doing, I would appreciate you giving me a subscribe. I would appreciate you giving me a like, a follow on Twitter. I always post some DFS notes. Usually I post them Thursday night, but here it is Thursday night, and I'm just recording this. But yeah, I usually have a DFS article that comes out too. Hopefully I'll get that out by tomorrow. Give that a look. I would appreciate you supporting what we do. This is brought to you by thebreakdownsports.com. We'll post a link to our Twitter as well. Would love if you could give us a follow. Let me continue. All right, Memphis versus Cincinnati. So this is probably going to be one that people go to for a game stack, and I don't hate it, but I also don't love it. Cincinnati's defense is really good. They're ranked 5th nationally in yards allowed per play. That's at 4.05. We saw what they did last week when they really shut down that SMU offense, and that's a really good SMU offense. You have to remember this SMU team beat Memphis, although I think that was a little bit fluky. I wouldn't really assume that this Memphis team is worse than SMU. I think that's a little silly. I was all over Cincinnati at plus 2.5 last week against SMU. That line was like ridiculous. And then I'm not sure how they're 7-point favorites over Memphis after that. I don't necessarily disagree with them being 7-point favorites, but to have a 9.5-point swing when, I mean, okay, SMU beat Memphis, but like I don't think there's anybody that really thinks SMU's much better than Memphis. Maybe like a tiny bit, but not much. So anyway, the line is kind of hard to figure out. I still am a fan of the Cincinnati team though. They are 8-2 against the spread in their last 10 meetings with Memphis. They rolled up 313 yards on the ground against SMU last week. And this Memphis team, you know, they run a similar high-paced offense to the one they saw last week. Ritter had 233 passing yards and 115 rushing yards. Last time they played in the AAC championship game against Memphis. And Memphis has given up at least 24 points in every single game. So it's hard to know where to attack this one. I mean, the Memphis guys are really expensive as we're looking at them here, and Cincinnati has a really good defense. So what I'm going to do with that, I'm not going to pay up. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you pay up? I mean, you can. I don't hate them, again. But like I said, there's not as many great, fantastic home run options as there usually are. So I guess you could do a game stack. But I mean, they have reasonably priced guys. This guy, Rodriguez-Clark, their running back, 5.7K, he gets 20 carries and 100 yards every single week. So if that's his minimum floor, I mean, they haven't really been going to him all that much in the red zone, so I don't know what his upside is, but he's fine at 5.7. And Calvin Austin III, their wide receiver at 5.9K, I have to have a lot of ownership of him. I think he's a fantastic play. Ever since their top wide receiver, DeMonte Coxey, went out, he's had targets of 16 and 14 in the next 2 games. And the one before that, I think Cokesy played, and he still had 10 targets. So Calvin Austin absolutely has to be in some of your lineups. I'm not super interested in anybody else. I think the only reason he's super cheap is because they haven't really updated their pricing. Or their, they still think Dykes is going for 30 fantasy points per game when he's not. That's just because they haven't updated their crap in forever. As far as Cincy, I mentioned Ritter's stats in the championship game. I played Ritter. He was 5.8K in the night slate. I hope you played the night slate, and I hope you saw that. He had like 170 rushing yards or something crazy. But he's too expensive. I mean, Memphis's defense is no good, but that price for Ritter, I mean, this team doesn't really throw the ball well at all. So you're really counting him to go bananas on the ground, which, can he do that? Sure, he can do that, but I don't really think the likelihood is super high. Jared Dokes at 7K, I think he's a fine play. He might make some of my lineups. I think they're going to be able to run the ball here. Memphis's rush defense has been better than it was last year when it was a sieve, but it's still not super trustworthy. And I never play Cincinnati wide receivers. However, Alec Pierce is their top wide receiver. He was hurt up until last week, and then he had the most targets on the team in his first week back. So if you're going to play anybody, I would play Alec Pierce at 4.2K in what could be a high-scoring game. You should not have the top wide receiver be 4.2K in a high-scoring American Athletic Conference game. So Alec Pierce is okay, but again, I usually have it as a taboo to play their wide receivers, so I wouldn't go too crazy with that at all. All right, Auburn versus LSU. This is a tough one to call, but there should be some points in this one. LSU's run defense has allowed over 5 yards per carry in each of their last 2 games, while Auburn's defense was ranked 3rd in S&P Plus in the preseason, and they have really not met expectations. They are at 30th after 5 games. Tank Bigsby, Auburn's running back, I mentioned him last week. He was very, very good to me. He has 60 rushes for 386 yards and 3 scores over his last 3 outings. He's a freshman. He took over the starting role because they had some injuries, and he has clearly been the top guy. Last I checked, he led the SEC in missed tackles forced, and he is a beast. So I love me some Tank Bigsby. I liked Bo Nix last week against Ole Miss. This LSU defense sucks, but I don't quite think they're Ole Miss. So Bo Nix is okay, but I really don't love him. Because, 1, he's Bo Nix, most importantly. But 2, Bo Nix sucks with pressure. When there's pressure, he really, really, really struggles. I think there was a stat. I don't know if I'm just imagining this because that's what it looks like when he plays. But, he was, never sacked once in all of his high school. Or up until, he went to Auburn, he was never sacked or something like that. And you can totally tell by the way he plays, especially last year. He just, runs around and does crazy things, expecting to never get sacked, like he's invincible, and it doesn't pan out very well for poor Bo. And LSU leads the SEC with 7.5 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks per game. So while they aren't very good at much, they are good at getting pressure. So if I am tacking Auburn, Seth Williams, we were all over him last week. He was way too cheaply priced. He's still a little banged up, but he's okay at $6,000. But where I really want to go is Bigsby and Schwartz. Schwartz at 4.9. They flipped Williams and Schwartz's pricing. This pricing is really lazy, even more lazy than it usually is in college football, where they're not always quite on top of it as they are other sports. I'm definitely going to have Schwartz. This guy is seeing 10 targets every single game. He's the fastest guy in college football. LSU, they were number 74 in the entire country. They allowed an explosive play on, shout out David Hale on Twitter. He's usually the ACC guy, but he has some really good stats. I think it was on 17% of their plays. LSU was allowing an explosive play, which is just silly and terrible. And Anthony Schwartz was the most explosive guy in all of college football. So while the offense may not be able to get him the ball deep, if Bo Nix can't really throw the ball very well, just throw it to Anthony Schwartz 10 times against LSU, and he's probably going to break a big one. So I like Anthony Schwartz to have a nice TD run. He hasn't been able to get it this year, which has been surprising. So I would take him to break out of that slump here. It's not even a slump because he's been doing fine, but touchdown slump. All right, TCU Baylor. I guess I have to talk about this game. It's a Big 12 game, but not one I'm interested in. The total is at like 49. Baylor's offense has been god awful to start the year, and TCU's offense is not very good. As far as TCU goes, their quarterback, Max Duggan, I guess he could run for a couple touchdowns. I usually like to play him when he's underpriced. His pricing has been okay the last couple of weeks, so I haven't really played him very much. But I think Baylor's better defensively than they are offensively, and if Sam Ehlinger can go for a crazy amount of points against Baylor, I don't see Max Duggan doing it. So I don't like any of his wide receivers, and they give about 18 different running backs carries. So there you go. I mentioned TCU. All right, Baylor. Charlie Brewer has looked like crap this year. I talked myself into Charlie Brewer this year, and I don't know what happened. I watched him last year, even when they were winning, and I kept thinking to myself, and I kept saying, Charlie Brewer is not good at quarterback. He has a very terrible arm, and he just doesn't look like he's confident. He doesn't look like he has, like if I'm a wide receiver and Charlie Brewer's throwing me the ball, I'm not confident that thing is getting to me. If there's the slightest bit of wind, then you would imagine a Charlie Brewer pass sailing out of the empty stadium. Anyway, he hasn't been very good. So TCU's defense hasn't been as good as we would normally expect. So could he rush for a touchdown and throw for 1 or 2? Sure, he could. But I don't see how you trust anybody. Their top wide receiver so far has been R.J. Sneed. He's been seeing about 8 or 9 targets each and every game. But he hasn't been doing very much with them. So at 5,000, he's fine, but whatever. Both of their running backs decided to opt out for the season, it was reported, and then they decided not to opt out for the season, it was reported. So anyway, this Baylor team is a mess, especially offensively. So I pretty much gave you nobody to play in that game except maybe R.J. Sneed. Not an interesting one at all. All right, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech. They should roll Georgia Tech. They rolled Pitt 45-3 last week. They're a little bit of a temperamental team because the week before that they only won 12-7 versus Louisville. So not a team you can completely bank on, but I will have some Notre Dame this week. Ian Book should be more expensive than 7,000. Ritter is 8.3 and Ian Book is 7,000. And they're both playing bad defenses. Okay. Ian Book had a good game last week. He threw for 3 TDs and rushed for 1, didn't he? Let's see, 312 and 3 through the air and 40 yards on the ground. I do not believe he had a touchdown rushing on the ground, but he certainly could here. He has no stacking options because they spread the ball out a lot. This guy, Skoranek, Northwestern transfer, had 2 touchdowns. Last week he got banged up a little bit, so I don't love to see that because he's always banged up. That's the knock on him. But he's fine. Braden Lindsey, their most explosive wide receiver's out. This guy, Meyer, their tight end, freshman stud, Michael Meyer, has been getting more and more targets each and every week. I think he had 8 targets last week. So at 3.8K, if you need a very cheap option or perhaps a cheap stacking option with Book, I like that. Kyron Williams, their running back. I love me some Kyron Williams. He is underpriced here against, again, a bad Georgia Tech defense that can be easily beaten on the run. I think they're allowing 199 rush yards per game. And Kyron Williams is their best offensive skill player, by a country mile. One of the better freshmen in all of college football, especially at the running back position. And he can catch passes too. So what's not to love? All right. Speaking of what's not to love, Georgia Tech. You're going to play their... Here's another good freshman running back. Wow, we have some good freshman running backs in this game. I'm not playing Gibbs against Notre Dame. No, thank you. Could he catch a screen pass and go to the house? He might. But at 6.2K, that's a little expensive. Jeff Sims, if you're going to play anybody, it would be Jeff Sims. Again, he makes a lot of mistakes, and he's playing a very good Notre Dame team. So I wouldn't go crazy, but he can run the ball. So at 5.5K, maybe. But I've seen people talk themselves into a Jeff Sims punt play against good defenses before. And Spoiler alert, it didn't work out. I think it could work out here, but not thrilled about it. I'm not crossing it off. I may have him here or there, mostly due to the rushing upside. Okay, Rutgers, 1-0 Rutgers, undefeated Rutgers. They beat the Spartans. Not interested in Rutgers. They're playing an Indiana defense that is okay to possibly good. Both of these teams are coming off upset wins. They're playing Indiana, who obviously beat Penn State. Both of them were severely outgained in the yardage department, which usually doesn't spell great future success, especially not fantasy-wise if you're getting severely outgained and not doing anything offensively. So Rutgers, not sure why I'd be interested in them. If their quarterback was cheaper, I would go there, but he's not. Pacheco's too expensive for me. If Penn State's running backs couldn't have a field day, why would he? And only person I might have some interest in is their top wide receiver, Bo Melton. This guy's really, really talented, but he hasn't shown very much since he's been in college. He had a decent game last week, which is encouraging. 4 passes for 50 yards against Michigan State. So maybe Bo Melton, but it's a little dicey. All right, on the Indiana side of the ball, while they couldn't do anything against this Penn State, well, it seems weird. They scored, 36 points against Penn State. They couldn't move the ball at all. They had like 100 yards on their last drive, then 75 of that on their last drive, and then 25 in overtime, so 100 total yards, and they still didn't even crack the 300 total yard barrier. I will give them a pass because I do think Penn State's defense is very good, especially in the secondary, and they still won the game. It was cool. But as far as a fantasy perspective, usually you would look to fade them the next week. However, their prices are somehow right in line with Rutgers prices, which doesn't make any sense. Stevie Scott should be able to run the ball. He is their bell cow. He has been for years and years. Seems like he's been at Indiana forever. Stevie Scott the third should be like Stevie Scott the eighth, one for each year he has played, one for each year of eligibility. Anywho, he's fine. He's a little expensive. I don't love it. I think Rutgers gave up around 200 rushing yards to Michigan State. So if Michigan State can run the ball, Indiana will probably be able to run the ball. I think the passing game on Indiana, though, is underpriced. I will have some Michael Penix Jr. He was a guy I had circled going into the year. He's a good dual threat. He was extremely efficient in his prior starts. Obviously, he was not efficient last week, which does give me cause for concern, especially because he's coming off of an injury. So I do not know if he's going to be at 100%. But, even if I'm just going to judge by that very last play where he stretched the ball out along the sidelines, I still don't know exactly whether or not the ball crossed the goal line. But still, the effort he made was incredible, and he was really going for it. So I really like to see that. I could see him contributing in the rushing attack more than he did last week as well. So we'll have some Michael Penix Jr. If I felt better about him coming off the injury and I thought he was at 100%, I thought he was as good as he was last year, I would have 100% Michael Penix Jr. this week. I am not sure of that, so I will not have a crazy amount of him, but I am very interested in him still. Their wide receivers are too cheap. They have 2 guys who are by far their top guys. That's Walt Fillier. This guy sees a ton of targets in PPR. He should be a monster. Definitely a candidate to go over 100 yards this week at 5.4. That is very good. And then Ty Freifogel, perhaps that's how you pronounce that. Very interesting name. They have some weird names on this team at the wide receiver position. 4.1K, he's their clear number 2 guy. They had pretty much identical production in last week's game. So at 4.1K, that's an underprice. And then Peyton Hendershot is one of the better tight ends in all of college football. He should not be 3.6K. That is too cheap. He could have a touchdown. So I like all 3 of these guys. I still think Fillier's the best guy, but he is also the most expensive. So probably, Freifogel's only 500 more expensive, and I think he's probably a better play than Hendershot. But they're all fine. You could stack them with Penix. You could play them individually. Definitely a team I'm targeting. All right, another pretty good game here. Fantasy-wise, we have Ole Miss versus Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, if you don't know by now, they're one of the worst Power 5 teams in college football. We would assume this is a get-right spot for Ole Miss's D, but you could also argue it's a get-right spot for Vanderbilt's offense. Vanderbilt's offense has yet to hit 270 yards total In their first 3 games, they have yet to hit 26 points. They are averaging 8.0 points per game. Pretty dreadful. And also, I was reading some quotes about this Vanderbilt team. He's their coach. Was it Derek Mason? Mason said, "I've got enough players to play right now. We're still working our way to full strength. But if we had to play today, this football team could play." Not exactly confidence inspiring. We could play football if we had to. Well, you have to this week. I guess they don't have to. Maybe they'll choose not to. Anyway, they were around about 40 scholarship players supposedly last week due to COVID, and now they're up to around 53. But that's still bad. And plus, they were hit very hard by opt-outs, harder than any other SEC team, in my opinion. They had 10 players opt out before the year. So, not really sure you want to have a ton of Vanderbilt, but their players are like all minimally priced, and Ole Miss has, maybe the worst defense in all of college football. So, I'll have some Vanderbilt here and there. Ken Seals, their quarterback, at 5,000 is an okay punt play. He's whatever. He looked okay in the Texas A&M game, but they've been pretty bad since. Okay, the running back position is where I'm interested in here, guys. If I knew Marlowe was out, he's not listed on the depth chart, but apparently he's practicing and could return, which kind of dampers my spirit here. I guess. So here's the thing. They had quotes saying, I believe it was Mason who said he was not impressed with Marlowe. So I think even if he does play, I don't know how much of the field. I don't think he's going to be dominating carries. Same goes for Wakefield. This guy, Henry Brooks, came back last week and led the team in carries with 13. That was impressive. And with them being in the media saying they're not getting enough out of their running backs, Henry Brooks at 3.9. But again, are you really wanting to choose between 3 different running backs on the worst offense in college football? Well, if they're playing Ole Miss's defense, you might be. So, again, proceed with caution. Not really interested in any wide receivers. All right, Ole Miss. I'm going to have me some Ole Miss on all fronts. Elijah Moore, worth mentioning every week. This guy's a target hog, 8.4, very expensive. Matt Corral at 8.5 in a week where there's not very many teams worth paying up for, as I mentioned. Maybe he's worth paying up for this week. I'm not super crazy on the passing game this week, but I do still like it. I'm not usually playing their secondary wide receiving options, Yeboah, Mingo, Drummond, because they're just really hard to peg down, and especially in a game versus Vanderbilt where they might just absolutely run them off the floor, run them off the field, I suppose. I don't know. However, I will have a lot of ownership of this backfield for Ole Miss. Jarian Ely, 6.6K, should have a big game. Snoop Connor, 4.3K, should have a big game. These guys both get a fair amount of carries. I think they're probably going to both get at least 15 carries, I would guess, in this one. That's been about their standard. They run a lot of plays. And Snoop Connor, he gets goal line work. I went to him last week, didn't quite work out, but they weren't playing Vanderbilt. So at 4.3K, that's way too cheap for Snoop Connor. I will have a lot of him. And I like Ely too. All right, Texas versus Oklahoma State. I'm actually not going to have very much Texas at all. Sam Ehlinger is obviously fine, but Oklahoma State has a good defense, and he's priced to the roof. He's almost 10,000. Their passing game was a mess last week. Jake Smith, I thought, was their best option. He finally came back and was in the slot, which is usually the money position for Texas. But he had 1 catch for 14 yards, I believe it was. So, and then their running backs, Ingram is their top option, but Roschon Johnson and Bijan Robinson also get carries. I played a little bit of Bijan Robinson. He was 3.3 last week because he's an extremely talented freshman, but he's probably not going to get more than 5 carries. So I guess he's worth mentioning again here at 3.8K. Roschon Johnson hasn't really done much, but he's still too cheap. But nothing excites me on this Texas team. The wide receiving core is a mess. They're too cheap, yeah. So could there be value? Yeah, but I don't know. I still think Moore is their top guy here. Joshua Moore at 6.7K, but he's laid his duds as well. So not a lot of Texas. You could do a lot worse than Texas. But it's not a typical Big 12 shootout like you might be thinking. Oklahoma State's defense has been very good. And they are not playing at a crazy high pace, as you might expect. Okay, Oklahoma State, I'll target more of them. I think they're an easier team to read. Of course, if they're an easier team for me to read, that probably means they're an easier team for everybody else to read as well. So ownership might be in effect there, but I'm not that worried about that in this one. I will have Spencer Sanders shares. Say that 5 times fast, and then roster him 5 times as well, just as fast. 6.6K. I mean, this guy's a dual threat. He came back last week, threw for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, ran for 70 yards and a touchdown as well. I liked Oklahoma State going into the year. That opinion hasn't really changed for me by these two teams' performances so far. I think they've been way more impressive so far. Texas is going to be the best offense that Oklahoma State has faced yet. However, the Cowboys are going to be the toughest defense that Texas has played so far. So I more would trust Oklahoma State on that. I will have some Tylan Wallace at 7.1K. This guy sees at least, I think he's got like 11 targets in each of his last 3 games, something like that, but he's a safe bet for over 10 targets. So I like me Spencer Sanders. I like me Tylan Wallace. Chuba Hubbard is a little bit expensive. You could always do worse than Chuba Hubbard, but he hasn't quite been what he was last year. And with some other good running backs, I probably will more lean towards Sanders and Wallace in this one. The secondary passing options for Oklahoma State have not been good whatsoever so far this year. Dylan Stoner hasn't really done much. I still think he might have a big game or 2 in his belt, under his belt, however we say that phrase. But at 3.5K, you could do worse as a punt. All right, we're almost at the finish line, fellas. Virginia Tech, Louisville. This game has one of the higher totals on the slates. I don't know if it's because last week I had some Virginia Tech Wake Forest game stacks where Virginia Tech just didn't come through. I'm not sure what it is, but something is telling me that I don't want a ton of ownership in this game, even though I usually look Louisville's way and they were very, very good to me last week. I'm not sure what it is. Virginia Tech's defense has been beatable so far this year, but at the same time, they have been without like half of their roster for some of their games. That's an exaggeration, especially in the secondary, though. They've been really beat up. Louisville's defense is not good. They have clearly been making some signs of improvement, and while they're not good, they are also not quite as terrible as you might expect. They did hold Notre Dame to 12 points, and while that was a little bit fluky, still worth noting you cannot do that with an awful defense. So they may not be awful. They might just be bad to very bad. Okay. Virginia Tech, I was telling people probably shouldn't own Herbert last week. Maybe I got lucky on that one versus Wake Forest. But he's been fantastic so far this year. My issue is that they never really feed one running back that much in this system. And also Hendon Hooker, the mobile quarterback, is going to eat into his carries just a little bit. I still think they have a very good rushing attack. I still think you can beat Louisville. You could do a lot worse than playing Herbert this week, but it's hard for me to get very excited with all those factors working against him. Hendon Hooker is way too expensive. No thank you. I don't understand that one. As far as the receiving options, I am going to play some. So these guys are fine. Robinson and Mitchell are fine. You usually don't want to play a lot of Virginia Tech receivers because they don't throw the ball all that much, and when they do, they spread the ball around. However, I think Trey Turner is their most talented wide receivers, in my personal opinion. You can see here, 5 targets for 61 yards against Wake Forest last week. And he's very fast, and Louisville's defense is very beatable. And I think it's only a matter of time before he breaks a long touchdown. So at 3.8K, you could do a lot worse. Not super interested in any of these other guys, but if I had to play another one, I'd probably play Mitchell, their tight end, at 5.2. That guy is an absolute beast. It is worth noting Burmeister seems to have been looking his way a little bit more than Hooker has so far. Hooker not looking his way. Poor fella. Anyway, Louisville. I loved him last week. I don't love him a ton this week, but their pricing is still good. Tutu Atwell at 6.8K. Of course, he could catch a few more big ones. He's fine. Don't love him quite as much as last week, but he's fine. Javian Hawkins, same thing. He's fine. I would say if I have one area of concern watching this Virginia Tech team, again, very difficult to tell because their whole roster's been out with COVID, it seems like. I think you can beat this team running the ball like you could last year. They have guys back there who make plays and get tackles, but it seems to be after you've already ran for 8 to 10 yards or so. So while Louisville's offensive line still is not great, I don't think you need a great offensive line to be able to run the ball. So I would guess Hawkins gets the job done here. Cunningham, you can't trust him so far this year. It pains me to say he's one of my favorite players, but not enough volume, and he hasn't been running the ball like you might expect. Des Fitzpatrick remains to be too cheap at 3.9K. He hasn't done like anything in his last 3 weeks, like really bad. But I don't know. He had a good year last year. I think he's the clear number 2 option at 3.9K. In a game that has a decently high total, you could certainly do worse than Des Fitzpatrick. Oh, we made it to the end, folks. I thought we had one more because Wisconsin-Nebraska has been canceled. Okay. As far as a quick positional overview, not playing these super expensive quarterbacks. I like Matt Corral at 8.5. I think I totally neglected LSU. I did. I skipped over LSU. You know what? I'm going to mention LSU here before I do that. Miles Brennan is out, or he's doubtful, I guess. So TJ Finley, his backup, is a fine play. While I mentioned this Auburn defense isn't as good as we thought it would be, it's still not terrible. So I think assuming TJ Finley is going to come in here and have another big game, I'm not sure that's going to happen. He did have a good game last week. He's a beast. He's big. He can run. So I don't hate him at 7.3K. I'd rather play a guy like Brock Purdy or something, but he's worth mentioning. His receiving targets, Terrence Marshall is always worth mentioning. I'm not sure this is a target I will have quite as much of him, but I've been rostering him a little bit pretty much every week. And it seems like he's just going to catch 50 touchdowns at this point, Terrence Marshall. He doesn't quite have the targets he would like to see, and he hasn't had the quarterback consistency. So at 7.8K, I have some concerns, but he kind of seems to be a guy who's just so talented and pretty much matchup proof that it doesn't matter a whole lot. Eric Gilbert, 4.1K, the stud freshman tight end. I think he's their most reliable second option in my opinion, so I don't hate him. As far as running back, their running backs are interesting here. TDP and John Emery are their top 2 guys. TDP's been getting more carries. He's been better, so at 6.1K, I don't hate that. And John Emery, I think, has more big play explosiveness while he hasn't shown a ton of that. So they're both fine. Not like crazy interesting, but they're definitely good for their price point is what I'll say in a game that has a decently high total. Okay, hopefully I don't come across anybody else. I like Purdy. Don't love Nix, but he's okay. I really like Ian Book. DJU. Have to have some DJU. Spencer Sanders, 6.6. Yes, sir. Michael Penix, 6.2. And as far as any of your cheaper options, I mean, there are a lot of cheap options. I don't really love any of them. Will Howard, Jerkovic, Sims is okay. Gatewood at 4.7K if you are completely broke, and Ken Seals at 5K. Like, none of those guys are terrible. They're not terrible options. So if that's your style, you could play any of those guys. There's not one I love, though. All right, as far as the running backs, a lot of good ones, man. Letty Brown's okay. Etienne's better. Breece Hall's better. Herbert, Hawkins is okay. I like Scott. I like Kyron Williams. I like Dokes. Basically, the moral looking at these running backs is there's not a whole lot separating them for me. There's some good ones, but there's not a whole lot separating those guys at the top, so there's no guy I'm really going out of my way to own. I like Bigsby. I like Ely. TDP is okay. Zamir White is okay. John Emery is fine. Rodriguez Clark is fine. But other than that, my paydown guys, if I get more clarification on Vandy, maybe. But Felton Gardner and Snoop Connor. I mean, Snoop Connor clearly stands out from these lower priced options. All right, as far as the wide receivers, Anthony Schwartz, I see you. I think if I'm paying up, Tylan Wallace sticks out a little bit in this range. Elijah Moore and Marshall are always fine options. I think I prefer Wallace than Atwell this week, but they're both okay. I would prefer Rodgers to Moore. Seth Williams is fine. Calvin Austin at 5.9 clearly sticks out. Hutchinson at 5.5 is fine. Naylor at 5.1 is fine. Ronnie Bell at 5.3. Fillier at 5.4. So it seems like there are a lot of mid-range options for the running or the wide receiver position. So that's probably where I'll mostly have my ownership. That should allow me to fit in 2 good quarterbacks and then maybe a stud running back as well. So again, I'll post some more notes on Twitter once I have my final lineup instructions. I don't really have any lineups fully in yet. As always, if you're going to play, make sure you're checking for the latest COVID news. Don't play a Trevor Lawrence. And a lot of this information doesn't come out until right before game time, so make sure you are on top of your information. Other than that, that's all I had for this week, folks. Thanks for listening, and best of luck this weekend.